sacrifices, and they're built so they can become holy, that Israelites can become holy and to remain in his favor. Right? There's dietary fences. We know that about the Jewish people. There's dietary fences. There's ethical fences. There's economic fences too. Too many to discuss in our time. They have allotted. Many of us, we may not call them fences. We may call them laws and commands. But for our time today, we're going to call them a fence. Now God is a good God. And every good parent builds fences for their kids. I had the pleasure of growing up in San Diego. And not only was the weather phenomenal, this is cold for San Diego here. When you wake up, it's 40 degrees. That's cold. Because it really basically stayed where I lived. It stayed between about 65 and 80 most of the year. Beautiful, beautiful weather. And I had the privilege of growing up about 10 minutes away from the ocean. And in my backyard, I had a pool. An in-ground pool, not one of those ones, you put up every season, because every season was a season to swim in California. And I had a pool, but it was interesting. When I was growing up, I remember when I was a young child, I was not allowed inside of that pool without my parents being around. Right? That would be ridiculous, letting your child outside. So outside of the pool, within about 10 feet of the edge of the pool, my parents had a fence. And it was one of those ornamental fences, right? You had a kind of a brick little column, and then you had metal ornamental fence and another brick column, and you had a gate that you can get in and out. But we always had this fence around, and my parents said, you can go in the backyard, you can play in the backyard. I played in the backyard a lot. They said, but you cannot go inside of that fence and play by the pool. Not until we got older. Because I didn't know how to swim. Or I did know how to swim, but still, I knew how to swim at a very early age. But without my parents around, I wasn't allowed in that. Now, what were my parents teaching me by putting up a fence? What were they doing? They were literally and figuratively, by the way, they were building this fence, and outside the fenced pool area, I had all the freedom, all the fun I can muster. But if I go over the fence, I would get in trouble because something bad could happen to me. Leviticus is God building a fence in areas of our life so that we could experience his favor and not have the bad things happen to us. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Leviticus 18. If not, it should be up on the screen for you. I want to start reading. We're going to read a verse. We're going to stop and just talk about it for one quick second, then we're going to move on. And we're going to have some observations that I'm going to want us to make sure we note. So Leviticus chapter 18, beginning in verse 1. It says, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Speak to the Israelites and say to them, I am the Lord your God.'" So we're going to stop already. Stop for a minute, and I want to start with an observation, okay, about economics. Number one, the Israelites were theists. They were theists. Now, what's a theist? A theist is someone who believes there is one God or gods, okay? But for the Israelites, they believed there was one God, ruler and creator over all. So we know the difference. That's a theist, somebody who believes in a god or gods. And then you have what we call atheists. We all have heard about atheists. The A in the word atheist comes from the Greek, which means without or not. So you have somebody over here who believes that there's a God. An atheist is somebody who believes that there is no God. So what we find out here in that very second verse of Leviticus chapter 18, he says, "I'm the Lord your God." So they believe in him. Now verse 3 says, You must not do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live, and you must not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I'm bringing you. Do not follow their practices. Okay, here we go. Observation number 2. The Israelites were told not to act like those living around them. God tells them, you're holy. You are set apart. I don't want you to do what they do. Now, look at what God does. He says, I don't want you to do what the Egyptians did. That's in your history, in the past. I don't want you to do that. And in the future, when I bring you into the promised land, he says, I don't want you to do what the Canaanites do. Instead, what he is implying to them is he is implying that I want you to do what I tell you to do. Because there is a distinctive between what other people do and what you are supposed to do. That's huge, guys. Listen, that is so big for us as people of faith and followers of Jesus. I think sometimes as Christians, we think if we could just make ourselves look like the rest of the world, then people will accept us, or people will accept Christ more. That's not true. That's not true. One of the things we realize is the more distinct we are, the more people will embrace it. And that's what he's telling them here. He says, listen, I am calling you to be different. I am calling you not to act like the rest of the world that you live in. Right? Everybody following me so far? That's what he says. Okay. Now, verse 4. He says, you must obey my laws and be careful to follow my decrees. I am the Lord your God. Keep my decrees and laws, for the man who obeys them will live by them. I am the Lord. Observation number 3. The Israelites were told to act in the way God had directed them to act. God's telling them, now listen, I have built this beautiful fence. It's huge, by the way. And I want I want you, and he's talking to you too, you guys understand this. I want you to live within the confines of this fence. All of the freedom, all of the fun, all the favor that I can muster and give you, God says, is found inside of this fence. Don't go outside the fence. Right? Don't be like the Egyptians. Don't be like the Canaanites. Do what I tell you to do. In other words, stay within the fence. Because if you stay within the fence, if you obey these laws, you will be blessed and you're going to have a long life. That's pretty cool. I think that's cool for me. And I try hard. You know, I know you try too. We try hard to do what God wants us to do. We try hard to stay within the fence. But there are some things, we're going to get to these in a little bit. There are some things that we kind of go, I could go outside the fence. It's not a problem. God will let me back in the fence. But what Jesus is talking about, he's talking about this sense of favor. In John chapter 10, verse 10. Yeah, I love this verse, one of my favorite verses. He says, you know, he's talking about Satan initially. He goes, he's come to destroy you. He comes to kill you. He's a liar. He's a thief. But I have come, Jesus says, I have come that you may have life and have it. Anybody know what he says? Have it what? Abundantly. You stay within my fence and you're going to have abundantly. Get out of the protective nature of my fence, and outside of that fence, they're going to try to take stuff from you, and they're going to try to hurt you, and they're going to even try to kill you. So let me break it down just a little bit more. As Christians, you and I, if you call yourself a Christian today, you are a theist. Okay? That means you believe in God. The church is a theocracy. We show our allegiance to God over any other government. Okay? That's what a theocracy is. A theocracy is God controls the government. We are his kingdom on this earth. And if we abide within the God-given fence, stay within his favor, we're supposed to do that as individuals and as a church. So, for the rest of our time today, as I said earlier, we're dealing with economic fences. With that in mind, it's important to see that the rest of Leviticus 18 deals with ethical fences. Right? Ethical fences. God speaks into, by the way, the moral life of Israelites, and he speaks into the moral life of you and I. And he does this because it's important to be ethically different from the others around them and to remain holy ethically, morally, by what you do with your body, how you talk, what you think, what's in your heart. All you have to do is read through it. Read through Leviticus chapter 18. Right? For example, I'll give you an ethics law, verse 9. It says, when you reap the harvest of your land, so they're out, right? They're out, it's harvest time. They said, don't reap the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and for the alien. In other words, don't be stingy. Don't hoard everything for yourself. Know that there are people out there who are going to need that, and they're going to come behind you, and they're going to pick up the stuff because they need to eat, and you need to take care of them as well. So he's talking about the ethical nature of them, whereas maybe the ethical nature of the Egyptians and the Canaanites is to make sure that nobody gets their stuff but them. He's saying, now, listen, give yourself some margin. Chapter 23, of course, deals with giving God first fruits. Chapter 25 talks about the Sabbath. Chapter 27 talks about the tithe. I point all these out because there's a declaration I want you to see. Most of us here do not have a problem with God dictating our ethics, because that's what we think God is, that God's an ethic dictator. That he tells us you can't do this, you can do this, you can't do that, you can do this. All of a sudden, as some of you in here, and it's like this in every church, some of you in here seem to think that you can pick and choose which laws to obey and which laws are not for you. That's a whole nother sermon for a whole different day. But when it comes to our ethics, most of us in here would say, you know what, we're theists. But when it comes to our finances, we are atheists. Israel has the same problem. And here's the declaration God is sharing with us that he shared with the Israelites in Leviticus. I'm going to give you one a week, okay? So here's the first one. God is the God of ethics and economics. He's the God of ethics and economics. So as we look at these, there are three giants that the Israelites dealt with that most Christians also deal with today when it comes to our economics. Okay? The first giant is what we call the economic tension. The Israelites went to the promised land. They looked around at all the wonderful things God had given them. I love this. All these, remember, the land that God was giving them was defined in awesome, great terms when he says, this is a land flowing with milk and honey. Those were good things, by the way. Those were things that people had that marked, generosity. And they went to the promised land, and they walked in as ethical theists and truly believed that God had his moral authority of their lives, but like many people today, they had difficulty with his economic authority. They didn't have a problem with God telling them what to do with their ethics, but they had a big problem with him telling them what to do with their economics. You laugh at me, but one of the jokes that sometimes pastors have with one another is we could stand up here in front of you and we could tell you all that you're going to hell. That I could look at your life and I can look at the fruit of your life and it's terrible, and I can tell you that, you know, you're doing this wrong and you're doing this wrong and doing this wrong, and you're just like, oh, Pastor, you may not like it, but if we start talking about what to do with your money, that's liable for you to get up and leave the church. So we always run the risk of this on some level. But ultimately, when we talk about the Israelites, they wanted to do two things that you and I want to do periodically when it comes to the fence that God has provided for us economically. And we're going to get into that, by the way, in the next few weeks, what that fence looks like. But ultimately, there's two things that we do. Number one, we try to move the fence. You ever do that? You ever have a fence that you're wandering around and you just kind of scooch it over a little bit, or you kind of move it a little bit, or maybe just the door to the fence, you know, so that they had their own opinions about how things should be done. So what they thought they could do is they can move the fence. They say, we're going to widen the fence over here a little bit more, and we're going to push this corner out over here a little bit more, and we're going to do this a little bit more because this is what we want. It's not what God wants, but it's what we want, and God's going to be okay. So we'll move the fence. We're still in the fence. Even though we're moving it, we're still within the structure of the fence. That's a good thing. God's going to continue to bless us on that. And that's one of the things that we like to do. We like to try to move the fence because we have our own opinions on how things should be done. But also, if we're not moving the fence, and this is the danger that we get in, we have this tendency, just like the Israelites, to want to move inside and outside of the fence at our own leisure, according to what we want, and still expect God to show his favor. It got quiet all of a sudden. So we have this fence. We have this fence, and God tells you, I want you to do this financially. I want you to do this ethically. And we go, I'm going to go outside the fence for a while. God will forgive me. And God will continue to bless me. Because he's a God of grace and a God of mercy. And he is. But we think, we can come out here, we can wander out here for the time, we can enjoy the fruits that are outside of the fence, and then we can go back in the fence and we go, okay, God, I'm here, I'm back in the fence, bless me. We're economic atheists. So here's a question for you. You don't have to answer. This is rhetorical, by the way. A rhetorical question that means you don't have to answer it out loud. Can you be a Christian and an atheist at the same time? See, because an atheist believes there's no God. An economic atheist is a person who declares with their lifestyle that I have no God over my finances. I can do it my way, spend it my way, build it my way. That's where the tension lies. That's where the gap lies. That we could literally be living as an ethical theist, that we could literally be living as an ethical theist and an economic atheist at the same time. And don't miss it. When we live as economic atheists, we choose to ignore the fence of favor God has set up, and yet we wonder why God is not showing us his favor in our lives. We say what we do with our money, but what we actually do with our money is something completely different. Not speaking bad about my father, one of my father's favorite sayings, and if he was here, he would say this too, was he would always go, do what I say and not what I do. I don't know how many of you have used that on your children. And we know how convoluted that truly is, don't we? And yet at some level we do it. Have you ever been around someone who says they're really good at something, but when they actually do it, they're pretty bad? I grew up playing basketball. I was good. I had D1 offers. I was good. Okay? I wouldn't get D1 offers today. It's a whole different ball game out there. But there was these guys who would show up, and we would be playing, and they would show up, and they're like, hey, you want to play? Yeah. Are you any good? Oh, yeah. And they get out there, and they wouldn't hit the rim when they shot. And they would double dribble every time they some of you don't know anything about basketball. You're not having a clue what I'm saying. Just trust me. They were bad. Okay? And it's laughable sometimes how bad people are when in all reality they think they're that good. I wonder how many of us God watches walk outside the fence and we say, you know what, I could win. I could do this while all the time God knows we can't. Do you ever wonder if God and the angels sit up in heaven and they hear us say that we're theists, but we act like atheists with our money and they completely lose it on some level? Do we really think that God, let me say this again, do we really think that you and I can have the life God has designed for us if we are theists in our ethics but atheists in our economics? We render God, now you ready? I'm going to say something that's going to make some of you mad. When we act like that, we render God powerless. Now some of you are like, when I was a kid, riding bikes was a big thing. That was before having cell phones, right? We would go on our bikes and we would go for hours. Our parents had no idea where we were at. We were in the canyons. We were riding down into, we just go, hey, we'll be back before, the street lights come on. That was basically our life. And parents were like, okay. And so we had these bikes, and there were all these kind of really cool bikes that we had, if you were really cool and you had a lot of money, you rode what was called a Laguna Cruiser, and those were the big ones that you sit on. You're like, yeah, all right. And then they had these dirt bikes. They had things called Torkers and Stormers, and at the time, I know this kind of sounds silly, but at the time, I had the awesome rendition of, oh my gosh, my mind just went blank. Who is the guy who used to jump over bridges and Evel Knievel. I had an Evel Knievel bike. And, I kind of had a longer seat, not a banana seat, but a longer seat, and it had the gas tank, the plastic. But it was time for me to move on, and my friend was getting rid of his, what he called a Stormer, and it was a dirt bike, and they're nice, really cool bikes. And so my neighbor across the street, his neighbor next to him wanted the bike too. So my parents, in their incredible knowledge, went, okay, why don't you both ride the bikes and we'll decide who's going to get the bike. So he goes, I remember his name was Todd. Todd takes off and he's riding the bike and he's jumping off the curb and doing all this kind of stuff, and he was really good in doing that. And my mom looked at me, literally, and goes, do not do that. You do not need to do that. Do not do that. And I said, Mom. She's like, no, just ride the bike. Okay, I got it. So I rode the bike. And guess what I did? I did everything my mom told me not to do. And I crashed it. The next thing I remember, I'm in the bathroom. My mom's taking care of the cuts on my head and my elbows. I had a concussion, all this kind of stuff. And, I could sense my mom sitting there. She's wiping off my scars going, I told you not to do that. My mom wasn't that kind of woman, though. But here's the deal. As much as my mom loved me, she was powerless in that situation. She did everything she could to empower me to have fun on the bike, to have freedom on the bike within the parameters of riding the bike safely. Right? But the reality was, when I was riding the bike, I chose to go outside of that fence on my own. And the same can be said for you and I in our dealings with Jesus. He defines the fence. He implores us, stay within the safety of the fence. There's fun, there's freedom of the fence. But at the end of the day, guess what? If you want to go outside the fence, you can. It's called free will. God cannot bless or show favor when you go outside of that fence. My mom couldn't stop me from crashing and watching her child, by the way, crashing on the asphalt street when he didn't do what she wanted him to do. So that's the first big giant, is that economic tension. Then there's what we call the economic cycle. Economic cycle is what God instills in our lives, just in life in general. You live here in Iowa, you understand this cycle, okay? Agriculturally, we get this cycle, and it's true in every avenue of life, okay? Here we go. You ready for the cycle? Plant, grow, harvest. I know you're thinking, we pay him way too much money to come up with that. Plant, grow, harvest. It's the cycle that God has created. But there, in our own hearts, there's a problem. And the problem is not in the cycle itself. That's a God-given cycle. But the problem comes in how we view the cycle. We understand the plant and grow part. We understand it, right? We get it. You got to plant. You got to grow. If you don't plant, it's not going to grow. If you don't plant, you're not going to be able to harvest it. Now, some of you plant, and your plants die, and you never are able to harvest things. You have a hard time with the grow. But you plant it, you grow. We understand that. But here's the problem. Ready? We love the harvest. We love it, don't we? Oh, man, that day where peaches and cream sweet corn comes out. Woo! You're going down there. Man, you're down at the farmer's market, and somebody has their truck wide open, and you're like, I want some sweet corn, and you go, how many do you want? I said, I don't care. Give me a dozen, and they end up giving you like 20, right? Anybody ever have that problem? They just give you way more than you think. And, oh, man, we love that. I love that. I love sweet corn, right? Or when a nice heirloom tomato is ripe, oh, you pick that thing off and you have that in your sandwich, and it's just, some of you are getting hungry right now, aren't you? We love the harvest. And here's the thing, as a pastor, we see this a lot, and any profession sees it a lot, but we have these young kids coming out of college these days, and they instantly assume that they're going to have all the benefits and all the pay of someone who's been in their job for 25 to 30 years. We see that as pastors. We see these kids, and when they're in college, they go off during the summertime, and they get internships at really big churches, because those are the only churches that can afford internships. Okay? So they go, the internships, they got secretaries, they got money to do whatever they want to do in their ministries, and they have volunteers that come and help. They have all this kind of thing. I'm always the one who always thinks, I think anybody who comes out of college as a pastor needs to be a pastor of a small church. Because I remember being the pastor of a small church in Montana. I was everything. I was a secretary, I was a janitor, I was a lawn care professional, I was the preacher, right? Main fundraiser, community support person. They all need to do that, but they come out and they have all this, and then all of a sudden they graduate from college, and what do they want to do? They want to go to a big church. So a small church that says, hey, we only can offer you this amount of money, they don't want to go. See, generally, life follows a cycle, right? In our teens and our 20s, there's seeds that are being planted. And in our 20s and 30s, those seeds have a tendency to grow. And when we get to our 40s and 50s, hopefully, we start harvesting all from the hard work that we put in. we can't walk out. I never thought of this. I never thought of walking out of my parents' house in my early 20s and expect to be in the same economic level as my parents. But we love the harvest so much that we try to bypass everything else and we go straight to consumption. And we forget all the hard work of planting and growing and we try to change the cycle. It stops being plant, grow, harvest, and it becomes harvest, harvest, harvest. And here's what happens. And applaud if you find this familiar. You don't have to applaud. That's just when a nation, a person, or a business who believes they can bypass the fence of his favor and the hard work of plant, grow, and harvest, they will eventually owe more than what they can make. It's called debt. The last giant. Once again, I told you we're just setting the foundation this week, okay? The last, so those of you, and we have quite a few of my friends that are here from Cedar Valley Church, you're just going to have to come back the next 3 weeks to get the rest of this. So, but I appreciate that you're here. Thank you. Love you guys very much. The third one is our economic fears. That's the third giant that we face. Because we all have them. I mean, let's be honest about it. Can we really trust God with our money? What if he doesn't provide? It's a curious thing, but it's true. And the curious thing is this: it is easier for us to trust God for our personal eternity than our personal finances. It's easier to say we trust God than to actually do it. And that's why we're doing this series. So that you and I will learn to trust God with our ethics and our finances. So as we close our time today, I want to finish just with a couple thoughts. As much as Jesus wants us to trust him with economics, I want to remind us, though, as much as we're talking about just economics, I also want to remind us that we have to trust him with our ethics. Not just what we do, but the spirit in which we do them. He warned the Pharisees of this very thing. In Matthew chapter 23, verse 23, he's having an argument, which is pretty common for Jesus, to have these arguments with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And he looks at them and he says, woe to you, teachers of the law, Pharisees, you hypocrites. You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, cumin. So you give all the way down to the very detail, to the very, very last drop. You make sure that you tithe everything. Then he says, but you have rejected the more important matters of the law. So this is important to you, but let me tell you what you reject, though, at the same time: justice, mercy, faithfulness. He says you should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. Jesus says, listen, continue to tithe. That's important. That's a law. Tithe. He goes, continue to do that, even down to the very detail of it. But on that note, do not do that and reject things like justice and mercy, compassion, faithfulness. Because it's not just about the legal thing that you do, it's about how you do it. Second thing I want us, and I'm going to end with this, for you and I to settle in our soul, is this thought. Living inside the fence, and I want you to hear me, is not how I can control and get God on my agenda. A lot of times people tell you, oh, you give, God's going to do this. So we seem to think that if we're obedient, that we can manipulate God to do what we really want him to do. And I know, I look at some of you who are surprised. Really? Is that? No. We're not being obedient because we want God to get onto our agenda. That's not why we're obedient. That's not why we do these things. We do these things because it's how God gets us on his agenda. A lot of times we miss out on God's agenda for ourselves, not just ethically, but economically, because we choose not to get on it with him. Living inside the fence is not how I can control and get God on my agenda. It's how he gets me on his agenda. So as we walk through the next few weeks, we're going to talk about some economic gleanings, and we're going to talk about what it means to give to other people and what it means to be generous. And many of you are already fulfilling a lot of these things, so I hope the next couple weeks are encouraging to you. We're also going to talk about tithing, especially why I tithe. Okay? I'm not going to sit up here and tell you, you need to tithe, blah, 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 blah. Right? You ever have pastors do that? They may not go blah, 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 but God tells us to tithe. People say in the New Testament, no, that's the old law. Well, Jesus just told the Pharisees to continue to do it, did he not? Didn't we just read that? We're going to talk about that a little bit, why we tithe. And we're going to talk about some other things, but the foundation is this, God. And I want you, and we'll end with this, God is the God of not only your ethics, but your economics as well. All right. God, thank you for this morning. Thanks for everybody that is in here as we look into your word, as we continue to honor you through our singing and through our prayers. May you, as always, get glory. And God, if there is anything that I said today, and I'm pretty confident there isn't, God, but if there's anything I said that is offensive to you, I pray for forgiveness. But God, I pray for all of our hearts that you will soften us and we'll focus on your desire for our life.